Hello and welcome to the Alex Waters Show. And on today's show, I have with me Tim Guest, the Managing Director and Founder of Infinite Wealth. Tim, welcome.
Hey.
Thanks for coming out to Cottesloe in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you here and good to catch up again after 100 coffees catch up. I think you were number 84, maybe 87.
Yep.
So yeah, how's life?
Life is good, mate. Sorry I wasn't able to make the launch that you did.
The party.
Yeah. I was really looking forward to it, but wasn't able to be there that night. But life is good. Life is good. 2020 has been an interesting year, obviously.
Yeah.
A little bit more so for me as well. I've had my first child in January this year, so I've got a 10-month-old now. But overall, I've enjoyed 2020 despite, I guess, everything that's happened.
Yeah, Awesome. What's in your version of what's happening right now around the world? What's happening in the economy?
Oh, wow. All right. So, geez, such an interesting conversation. I guess I'm struggling to even figure out where to start, right?
Yeah.
So, what's happening is we've had a global event which has triggered a global recession. Obviously that global event was a pandemic. What's probably interesting to note, though, and we can talk about this a little bit as well, is that we had a pandemic not that long ago as well. In 2009, we had the H1N1 pandemic, but notice how we didn't have a global recession. So, just something interesting to note right there. But essentially that was off the back of, I think, something like a 10 or 11 year bull run in the US stock market. It's really when markets are really only going that well that you can actually have events like this that cause these downturns. In fact, it's probably easier to really look at markets from a point of the higher they are or the higher they're going, the less and less stable they are, the more and more likely they are to collapse. If we look, obviously we're in Perth now. Perth real estate is an example. Over the last 4 or 5 years, it's really, it's dropped 22% and it's sat at that 22% for quite a while. See, we're actually on quite a solid floor there. Okay, there's actually quite a lot of certainty which is supporting that price, hence why it won't drop any further.
Yeah.
So, it's when it's kind of the opposite. When markets are going good, that's when there's uncertainty that's lingering in the markets. And at the other end of the stage, when markets have been down for a number of years, that you've got a solid floor from which we can, we talked about a little bit earlier, launch from.
Yeah. So you think we're in a global recession, but Perth is in a good place?
I think Perth is in a fantastic place for property. So maybe let me talk about it maybe a little bit like this. So, you might have some similar kind of education. Obviously, you're in real estate as well. I wasn't so much real estate, but more investing in property, but very, very similar. I had essentially been taught, and a lot of the reading and a lot of, I guess, the education that I'd done around property markets and property growth was essentially pointing to 7 to 10 year economic cycles.
Yeah.
I'd utilised those economic cycles, not necessarily intentionally, just, when I started investing, we're at a particular stage of the economic cycle. We'd kind of gone through that mining boom, early 2000s. We'd then gone through the GFC, which was well and truly kind of expected. We were then building up through, 2011, 12, 13, 14. And then I certainly anticipated that markets were going to, certainly in Perth, were going to continue to do well for another couple of years before... So the downturn hit me a bit sooner than what we expected. And I think what it did was kind of point out to me that, maybe a lot of the long-standing education and fundamentals that people base this on, maybe it's not as solid as what we think. And so, myself and some of my team, we started to do more in-depth research. And, one of my ethics and, one of the things that I'm always teaching my kind of clients and my students is, only listen to people who are where you want to be. Don't pay attention to people who don't know what they're talking about.
Sure.
So I went looking for who had accurately predicted the economic cycles over the past 30 or 40 years. And I initially heard of a UK land economist by the name of Fred Harrison, who had predicted the 87 crash in 83. He predicted the early 90s crash in, I think, 87 or 89 or something. So he was multiple years ahead, and he had this consistent track record. And then starting to really look into what he had uncovered, and that's essentially there was a few other land economists. So notice I'm saying land economists as well, very different to traditional economists.
What is the difference?
So
what is a land economist?
look, I mean, technically, I'm not, specifically they're educated. I don't really know, right? But you want, I guess it's interesting to think about, property from the perspective of what they refer to as Ricardo's 1809 law of economic rent. Okay, which basically states that the productive gains of society always and only end up in the value of the land.
Right.
Okay, so let me kind of, unfold this a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So let's say, we've got a person in Perth right now, goes and, we've got all these grants and stuff like that. They go and buy a block of land, build a house on it, anywhere, right? Maybe they're building in some place where there's not much, an estate out in the middle of nowhere. You buy that land, you build a house on it, you really don't spend any more money on it, okay? But then what happens is society spends money on things around it.
Yeah.
The roads, the infrastructure, the businesses, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it really is the value of that land will appreciate, but not because of anything that you've done.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. It's what society has contributed. Or,
Sure.
We kind of shorten this and say location, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really explain it enough.
Yeah.
If we look at it maybe from a slightly different perspective as well, is, say, I'm always a bit unsure about how deep I go into this stuff, right? So if you look at...
Let's go real deep on it.
So if you look at economics, right? In economics, what we are taught in modern day economics is there's two factors of production. Okay, which is, do you know what they are by any chance at all? No.
Go into
so
it.
labour and capital.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're going to start a business, say you're going to start a dry cleaner, all right? You want to start this dry cleaning business. What are the different factors that are going to cause, the production of that business? Well, you've got labour,
Yep.
your labour, your staff, and then you've got capital. Okay, so the plant and equipment. Now, what modern economics has done has essentially collapsed land into capital.
Right.
But land and capital really aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
Very clearly, most capital, plant, and equipment will depreciate while most land will appreciate. And if we looked at the traditional two factors of production, say you had a dry cleaner and you're right in the middle of the city, okay, you've got probably the same labour costs, the same capital costs. Okay, well, now let's compare maybe a dry cleaner that's in, call it Armidale, maybe where I grew up, Gosnells, right? Have they got the same labour? Yeah, they do. Have they got the same capital? Yeah, they do. But would it be unreasonable to expect that you're probably paying more at the city?
Yeah.
Right? So what's the factor that's not being accounted for?
Land.
Okay. Now, the other thing is that, how much do landlords charge people rent? As much as they possibly can that they will pay.
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially all of that...
Which is the value of that land.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see the flow,
Yeah.
and this is where, if we go back to hundreds of years ago, and, my knowledge about this isn't entirely accurate, right? But, when we go from the transition of the old days where, there were nobles and monarchs and, the wealthy that kind of owned everything, and then there were the peasants, the rest of us that basically owned nothing. There was a period of time where the world slowly started to transition over to more representative kind of governments, right? Well, the scam that got implemented was ensuring that the nobles were able to maintain a lot of their land.
Yeah.
Okay, even, when you look at some of the writings about the origins of government, the purpose of government is to protect property rights.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Right.
Whether there's been some kind of conspiracy, I don't know, right? But it doesn't make sense to me when I look at modern economics compared to the reality about how the world works.
Well, so how do you, because that's an interesting point, and I was actually going to ask you a question about this, but now we're here, so I'm going to ask it now.
Sure.
You talk about how when governments were set up, it was used by the nobles to basically say, okay, we understand we've got to make it look like you have a say now, but we're still going to protect our wealth. which ultimately is going to give us a lot of control. How do you think that that's playing out in the world right now? Because, I think that to the average person just going about their life, they might not get this deep into thinking about it, but the reality is there is a lot of wealth in the world being controlled by a couple of sectors, at least from what I can see.
Yeah.
And how does that then affect, what's happening now? Is it someone pulling a lever? Is it
someone? No, I don't think it's someone pulling a lever.
Okay.
I think the world is a highly, highly complicated place.
Yeah.
And
it's a good way to describe it.
yeah, and the ideas that there might be some small group of people that ultimately control everything, it doesn't really hold any weight to me.
Yeah. Okay.
I think, certainly people going through life have their aims. We're all out to fulfill on our aims. Well, some of us don't really even have aims. We're kind of aimless in life. That's the nature of the world. That's the nature of being a social animal where, there's kind of this current that's kind of happening out of this in the world, and your job is to kind of jump into the river and, do you fight the current? Do you go with the current? What battles do you fight? What battles do you let go? So how does it play out in the world? Well, I guess for me, here's what I think is important. So once I understood how it worked, I was then able to identify basically the cycles of how the economy turns. And what's also shown up, and these cycles have been demonstrated since prior to 1800 globally, regardless of kind of the players that come into the game, it doesn't really change anything.
Yeah.
Certainly the people that I pay attention to at the moment, we've had a lot of conversation recently about Trump and Biden and which is better and what's going to happen to the economy either way. The simple fact of the matter is it doesn't matter who the president is, the economy has always moved in a particular kind of cycle. And it's not specific, like every cycle there is variations and slight differences too. But if you step back, you can quite clearly see these cycles. And, to me, I'm not bothered about, okay, well, that's just the way it is. It's been like that for, thousands of years or hundreds of years. And there's probably not a great deal that I could do to change that. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not interested in playing that game.
Yeah.
Like, that would be incredibly costly on my own personal life. It's kind of if you can't beat them, join them. Like I grew up in Gosnells. I grew up in a southeast, pretty poor area, lots of crime. Dad was unemployed for a couple of years. And I just wanted to make sure that I was able to provide for my family and provide, that my kids didn't have the same kind of constraints. And the motivations were fairly simple to begin with. Like, one of the reasons why I wanted to be rich was so that I could afford money to buy nice clothes, so I didn't have to go to school in the King G school uniforms and get bullied by all the other kids.
Yeah.
Those were the initial motivations, So, obviously it's a lot more to it than that, but, I want to be able to provide for my family, and I don't want my family to feel constrained. And, it's interesting. I was listening to the podcast you did with Nathan.
Yeah.
And we're talking a little bit about money as well, and how, I think early on you're very focused on money, and kind of now we kind of realise that it doesn't really matter so much. And I think totally get what you're saying, and I'm sure you'd also agree it's not entirely the whole story either. Like,
totally.
If you're threatened, if your survival is threatened, there's been studies that have been done that show that people that are in certain economic conditions have lower IQs purely based on the fact that they're under that kind of strain and stress at that particular time. So there is a base level that we have to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was just something for me. I wanted to make sure I provided for my family.
Yeah. And for me, like that topic about creating wealth, or me saying it's not as important now, or what I'm really saying is it was my sole and entire purpose for living at one point.
Yeah.
Like, it became the reason I was living was to make money instead. And I forgot that all the things I was aspiring to, none of them actually mattered without people. Because if I had money but no people around me, no relationships, it didn't actually matter. I could have like a big house, but if I was the only one in it, it didn't matter. So that's the shift. Is like not making it not important, but that it's
Well, I think because I totally get what you're saying, and I'm wondering whether, because we're similar personality types as well.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether it's something that's quite common that people with our kind of personality types go for, particularly in that kind of period of our 20s to 30s. Like, for me, I mean, I share very much about how, my dad was unemployed, and obviously I didn't want to go through that, had no idea how, and, I was struggling to find out how, and there was a couple of different vehicles that I tried out, and then I met a multi-millionaire who kind of taught me what to do. But, and then over 5 years I bought, quite a number of properties, and I stopped working, but I was still fundamentally incredibly dissatisfied.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the money and the success, I was trying to achieve that as a way of trying to fill a hole.
Totally.
Or to make up for something that wasn't there.
Yeah.
And then realising how futile that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not regretting the fact that you're there, because it's kind of helpful. As in, it's kind of helpful to like actually have, like I say this all the time. I'm like, people go, oh, money doesn't buy happiness. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And I'm grateful that I was in so much pain, like trying to fill a hole with money, that I got to a certain point by the time I'm 30, because now I'm like actually, in a pretty decent position.
It's also
I'm sure you felt that.
Felt that
as well.
Totally. I mean, I also wonder how many, because I'm always trying to put myself, I guess, in other people's perspective, but I also wonder how many people out there might be listening to us talking about this and going, fuck that, I'd be happy to work for money as a way of trying to fill myself, because, because they haven't been through that experience yet, or that's
it. Yeah. So it's all part of the human experience. Totally. You can't tell someone not to do something because you've done it, and then like they might need to do it to have the exact same realization.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, I think possibly, especially being male, it's like you're becoming a man in your 20s, and
got to go and kill the biggest lion, basically.
Exactly.
Right?
That's one of the things that we think, and that's how it manifests in Perth, Australia, and like the Western world, where there are no lions to kill. So
it's just, I mean, I guess certainly no regrets.
Yeah.
But I do also wonder, like, there was, I had certain resources, resources like my age, my enthusiasm, the time, the money that I had at the time, and I think I do wonder if I had better awareness or better guidance, what I may have been able to turn that into. So not a regret, but
like at what age?
So I think for me, like, there was a real critical moment in my life when I was 29 years of age. So I'd been retired a couple of years. I'd been doing the things that I thought I was meant to do. I was partying, traveling, cars, all the kind of stuff, right? And if anyone questioned me about, how's life, what have I got to complain about? Like, look at this, kind of thing. Whereas I think really what was also, and maybe it was undistinguished myself, but I was fundamentally unbelievably dissatisfied. Unbelievably dissatisfied. And I think it had just built over a long period of time. I probably view, there was, I guess, the age of 7 and the age of 29 as two really distinctive times in my life. So, for me, the age of 7, I can remember being picked on, like, I think I may have shared this with you when we had a coffee, building up the courage internally, like, I'm going to go and do something about it. I'm going to go and tell a teacher. And then I walked in to tell a teacher that day and being pulled into the principal's office and getting in trouble because my bully had told his mum the night before that I was bullying him. So, I felt completely blindsided as a kid, and I was really walked away from that experience like no one listens to me. Like the teachers and my parents didn't support, or I didn't feel supported at that time.
Yeah.
And I think that really built that independence in me, and then I used that independence for the rest of my life and produced success, but then was still left like, okay, yeah, I've got money now, but I'm still as unhappy as I was, or I have been for my whole life. And when I say unhappy, I don't mean unhappy. It was more a constraint, like the inability to feel like I could express who I really was.
Yeah.
And be accepted or be known or be heard for that.
Yeah.
Which is probably a fundamental fear that most people have, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, 29, I actually went and did a self-development course that I didn't want to do. I did it to kind of make someone else happy reluctantly. And yeah, I really got to see that basically a decision that I'd made at that age of 7 had pretty much run my whole life. Like I just made a decision about other people in the world, and you kind of put on these, this lens of the world, and before you know it, you don't realize that lens is on, and you view everything from it.
So like, what do you wish? Because you said you like maybe have some regrets about what you could have done at a certain point if you'd had more awareness. Are you saying like at that point of 29, you wish you'd had more awareness to do some more, or you mean earlier in your 20s, like what you possibly could have created with more emotional intelligence or awareness? With that youth and energy.
I think a little bit of both. Like I said, it's definitely not a regret.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, right? Life is how it is, and it's right now, and that's it. You can't do anything about it, so you might as well be grateful for it, And I certainly am, because of the lessons I learned going through all of that. But I also, I used to have a commitment to achieving a lot because of what it would mean about me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I have a commitment to achieving a lot just for the fucking sake of it.
Yeah. Like, what else is there to
I'm
do?
here.
Yeah.
I'm only here for a short time.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm going to do with it, and I'm a little bit idealistic as well. Like I think we can have a better world. I think we can have better communication. I think we can take care of people better. I think people can understand themselves a lot better so that they can get themselves out of their own way. Like I've always been, I want to change the world, but my approach has always been, I really like working with other people, freeing them up so that they can change it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Like I like that kind of compounding power of it.
Mm. Yeah.
And also because what we want in the world, like I'm just one person with one perspective. Like what you want in the world is going to be different from my perspective, and what everyone, like maybe you're passionate about you're passionate about psychedelics, right? I don't think I know anyone else that's as passionate about you. I mean, maybe there's something that like you can really contribute to the world because of you pursuing that.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't pursue that.
Yeah, like imagine if everyone just took mushrooms, like the world would be an amazing place. Like it would be a better place.
I so want to talk to you about this more, hey?
Yeah. In fact, there's actually like one of my friends, when we were journeying once, had a profound realization and made a joke that she was going to get a plane and fly it across the world and drop mushrooms everywhere to like save the world,
So can we talk about mushrooms?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could. So,
definitely. Well, what are your psychedelic experiences? Have you
I've
had
only
any?
had 2.
Okay.
I really enjoyed them.
Yeah.
I don't know if I wouldn't go as far as saying I've had any profound experiences on them.
Okay.
Curious about it.
Yeah.
Not overly either, but what I guess, and I'm certainly not opposed to them at all. I mean, I think, particularly things like psychedelics and particularly things like marijuana have been demonized over the past 80 years, unfairly. And I'd really like to see those things decriminalised, but at the same time, or even legalised, sorry. But these things are complicated, and I wanted to ask you some questions about how you might see it. So, I mean, obviously you're an advocate for legalisation of psychedelics, right?
Yeah.
And actually, it'd be interesting. What is it that you think they offer? That sounded a little judgmental. I didn't mean that in any way like that.
I didn't.
I'm just curious.
I didn't perceive it as judgmental.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I think that's, we started by talking about economics and what's happening, and there's a lot of problems that there are in the world right now on a macro level. And then there are micro problems in people's lives and challenges, and what we were talking about before we jumped on the podcast, which was relationships and how we relate to other people and all that sort of stuff. And I think that the key to almost all of our problems as humanity is greater awareness, greater levels of emotional intelligence, more love, more compassion, and the human race and individuals in that human race liberating themselves from their conditioning and being free in who they are.
Can I ask, when you say emotional intelligence, what do you mean?
Intelligence.
I've heard the term lots, right? But I'm just thinking to myself, I don't even really know what that means.
Oh, well, for me, I'm sure people have a different definition of this, and I don't know what it says in the dictionary, but for me, it's like intelligence. Most emotions are reactionary responses. In that we feel an emotion, but we don't necessarily always have a thought before it. Sometimes we do. So it's always a sort of a reaction. And I think the vast majority of people are run by their emotions, whether that be their fear, anxiety, whatever it is that's coming up for them. They're sort of almost run and controlled by that. They are their emotions, right? For me, I think having emotional intelligence is understanding that you are not your emotions, just like you're not your thoughts, but being able to recognize that, being able to recognize the emotions for what they are in that time and process them. So that could be that that emotion is coming up for as a trigger of something else, and there is something that I need to let go of internally, some belief or a thought, or there's a conflict internally that I get to let go of. It's created by my conditioning, and in letting go of it, I'll be more free and more liberated as a human being.
Well, you've got choice, right?
Yeah,
you're not being run by your
the
stimulus response.
Yeah. So I think that's what to summarize it.
I was going to ask you about. Can we? I want to keep going down this tangent, right?
Yeah.
So, because you're also quite spiritual, right?
Yeah. In ways, I don't necessarily go around saying I'm a spiritual person. Yeah. I did label myself as that at one point, but I feel like once again it's just another label that people.
You did
attached to.
I saw something on social media recently. It was a ceremony that you did, or something along those lines. I can't remember what it was. A few weeks ago.
It depends what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, because it was something that I was really curious about. I mean, you may remember in the message back, I said, "Look, I'm really excited about speaking to you because I find we've got so many parallels, but there's also things where I find we're also quite a bit different. Well, maybe. And that was and something that I wanted to talk about with you, that kind of spiritual connection. Because I think, this might be a little like blanket, but I'm not spiritual at all. Yeah, it's actually something I almost stay away from.
Yeah.
Not. I just find, and then it was also good getting your definition of emotional intelligence as well, because that also fitted more, I guess, a lot more with the way that I approach things. Like I think. The way that I approach things is that my internal state is my internal state. And my internal state, it's a stimulus response, that the creature that I have literally no say about. And then not only that, but then we've also got this other level that goes on top of it, which is, we have these things that we refer to as emotions, which are often a physical sensation that we've labelled.
Yeah.
And... so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I've always tended to try and stay away from it. And I don't know if it's a smart idea, but just because I think the emotions and my internal state, like my internal voice or my physical state or my mental state, I've always found them to be a poor indicator of reality. This is kind of a bit crude, but just because I feel like there's a bear behind me doesn't mean there's a bear behind me.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested in exploring this with you because, I have an approach and I guess it's worked for me, but I love talking to fascinating people about fascinating things to learn new stuff and new approaches I've never really had before.
I think the reason I say I'm probably not spiritual, I wouldn't attach that label to myself anymore, is because I did attach it at one point, but to me at that point, really in hindsight, what it meant was a whole heap more of dogma and particular set of rules on how to live.
So
right?
at that time, you
At
were
that
kind of
time,
locked into a belief system.
That's right.
Yeah,
it was like
yeah.
a whole new belief system. This is like the universe telling
done
you
that
this.
several times.
Yeah, of course, right. I'm probably like we're both probably doing it. We're both probably doing it now in ways we don't realize.
Yeah.
And so, so I don't attach that label for myself now because I don't particularly live to any like that what I would consider that label to be. But if I hear what you're saying, what you're indicating is whether there is intuition being used or not, or how much I listen to that. Because you said you don't really listen to anything about that as far as like what reality is. I do believe that we have some.
I think I'm certainly using some form. Probably just realised my whole approach is a lie because I think I probably use some form of intuition as well. But
yeah, it's just gut feeling, right?
Yeah,
like I
try not. I try not to. I mean, look, one of the things that I have always tried to do is, look, I'm keen to produce results in reality. Like, if I want to have, an incredible relationship with my wife, I want that result in reality. If I want to have no constraint around my finances, that's a result in reality. So I try to bring myself back from what I consider is not reality, I guess. So, a bit philosophical and all the like, but, there's talk and from academia about how, we don't see the world with our eyes. We see the world with our brain. Our eyes, all they collect is photons, which are then transmitted into an electrical signal that's transmitted to our brain. And then our brain primarily recreates. It doesn't actually transmit the world as we see it.
Yeah.
It only transmits a very small portion of it. There's argument over that. But then what it does is recreates.
Like we're constantly hallucinating.
Pretty much, constantly. You like that, don't you? But yeah, so... I feel like I lost my train of thought now. But yeah, I guess when I am trying to make decisions, because obviously decisions, have repercussions and consequences, and I do try and remove that stuff because I know there's a lot of do they like me? Am I going to fuck it up? Am I all the doubts, all the internal stuff that goes on every time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I necessarily get caught up in all of that either, and I would tend to use a mix of logic. So I think if I can cut to the chase on what I think, I would say my philosophy on how I operate in life, or what you might call spiritual, is that I believe that for me, my goal and my intention with my life is to experience liberation.
Yeah.
Like that is the journey that I feel like I'm on. And
can you say a bit more about that?
Like liberation of self, being able to live completely free of, not that I necessarily will ever get here, because it's to say like this is what enlightened beings are like, and I'm not even necessarily pitching there, right? I'm just sort of doing my best, like in the moment today, to live free of of attachments, irrational fears. I'm not going to say all fears, because fear is a healthy thing. Like, if there is a threatening animal, a snake in my house or something like that, there's a real reason that we should be afraid of that.
Of course.
Free of attachments, fears, and to experience myself without limitations.
And I mean, that, of course, is a lifelong... I mean, it's like being a black belt at judo, right?
Yeah.
You don't get to black belt and go, all right, I'm done, I can stop now.
Yeah.
You keep training forever.
Yeah. So I feel like that's what it is for me. And to live from a place of abundance and love. But I'm not trying to tie myself to that.
No.
Like, I understand I experience all of it, and anger and sadness and all sorts of things. So it's not like any of that is wrong.
Aren't you kind of doing that already?
Yeah, I am doing it. Yeah. So I feel so fucking good. I definitely am. Yeah. If there was somewhere where I feel like I could have arrived, I feel like I've arrived for sure.
So I'm kind of left with, all right, now what next?
Just keep living.
Yeah.
yeah, just keep living and like keep doing it.
Yeah.
And then same sort of thing as you, like, okay, well, what do I do next?
I know,
What do I want to create now?
And I don't want to doubt, like,
Yeah.
you do you, right? But I don't know. It seems like I would feel robbed if that was all you did. Like here now, how old are you now?
30.
All right. Took 30 years to sort you out, right? Mm-hmm. Now what?
Work on,
and I'm sure you'll work. And
yeah,
I do
work on creating more of what I want.
Yeah.
I'm definitely here to have a human experience and like experience. Yeah. So like, do I want to create a bigger family, or like, do I want to create more wealth, or the next thing for me is to get a boat
as well, right? I mean, that's obviously what
free others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what like the podcast is about as well?
I don't know that the podcast is probably acting as a vehicle of that for sure. I think that there are definitely things that I do in my life with psychedelics, and I think speaking about it has caused a lot of people to seek it out, and they've shared with me their experiences, and I've witnessed people firsthand being freed from their childhood trauma or their conditioning or whatever it is. So yeah, there's definitely that at play as well. And I recognize that right now in Perth, it's highly illegal. So, there's only so much I can do around that right now as it pertains to that. But I think that's changing across the world.
Are you advocating or doing anything like that around psychedelics? Like, is there anything like you're... I mean, I don't know. Like speaking of MPs or...
Sure. Yeah. So, there's an Australian body called Mind Medicine Australia, and I've just joined their Perth chapter. They have like a former federal defence minister on their board and stuff like that. They're probably the most legitimate organisation in Australia as it pertains to the advocation of psychedelics in therapy.
Yeah.
How far I sort of sit with them on that journey, I'm not sure yet, because I believe in full legalization, whereas they're advocating, and I don't know enough about their internal strategy yet, but possibly that's just step one, advocating for clinical therapy use, and then it'll get
how would
further.
You see,
but
I mean, because I look, I haven't done a huge amount of research into psychedelics, right? But the little that I know, I know they present a huge amount of benefits, fairly little risk. It seems ridiculous. But I'm also curious about, like, how would legalization look? Because, it was another comment, I think, that you're talking about with Nathan, and I just wanted to bring it up because I'm curious myself. I've no answers for this stuff.
Which Nathan, by the way? I think
the florist? Was it Nathan?
Oh, Matthew.
Oh my God. Matthew Flanders. Did I call him Nathan before?
Matthew Landers, yeah.
Matthew, oh my God.
Yeah.
Got his name wrong twice.
Oh, if he listens to this, he's after you.
I might be on one of his Instagram stories or something.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But yeah, I'm curious because I also think marijuana should be legalized.
Yeah.
Personally, I think it would make a huge dent in the meth problem that we have here in Australia.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious about how, like, you would implement these kind of things and how they might work. And I think psychedelics, for me, I had a few more questions. Like, I imagine you're not an advocate for children, right? So 18 and above or something along those lines.
Yeah, I don't advocate for children to use it. You know what?
How do you think it might look? Or how do you think it might work,
I'm still probably, I think uncovering or starting to dive down this rabbit hole of conversation uncovers a heap of questions about self-responsibility, which is that predominantly we're in a society right now, and we have allowed it to be built up this way. Perhaps that relates to the same way government was created that we alluded to earlier in the conversation about it still sort of being a control mechanism. That we are really robbed of self-responsibility and accountability in society. By way of we are told in many ways how we need to live our life and what we can and can't do. And I'm not talking about some pretty clear and cut simple things. It is like you can't murder someone, that's wrong, right? Sure. I'm talking about Alex, can't go and walk into that bush, pick that plant and put it in my mouth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Like I'm not going to.
Yeah.
It's not going to affect anyone else, but that's what we're dealing with here.
But
there are layers and layers of that
Yeah.
in our laws and in different ways, which be hard to get into. But I think that a part of full legalization around these things is a lot of education, because you mentioned marijuana maybe putting a dent in the meth problem that we have. I don't necessarily know that from my experience would impact it.
Yeah, look, it's a guess.
But there are things that would. For instance, psilocybin, and there's a powerful psychedelic called ibogaine, which is known to be highly successful at treating opioid addiction and other kinds of addictions. So, and there are people who take psychedelics and then with the insane awareness that they have, had, or the profound realizations that they've had in the journey, they stop drinking, or they stop taking
without no argument from me. When it comes to therapeutic treatment,
I
think the results have been pretty clear that there's significant benefit. I think more, I'm curious from my own mind, just, I guess because a lot of that therapeutic stuff would be in controlled circumstances, right?
Yeah.
Because, full legalisation, like you said, could essentially mean that you could go and pick that plant up and, but maybe not everyone has access to it, so what, are people able to buy it at a store? And then if they're able to buy it at a store, I imagine there's probably going to be some fairly simple ones like, you got to be 18, you can't operate a motor vehicle,
For sure.
those kinds of things. But I'm also curious because, you say about how we live in this world of, like, self-responsibility. But I don't know that most people are responsible.
I agree with you, because we've generationally, like we have been living in this society where we haven't been allowed self-responsibility, or we have freely given it up. But I think that comes to be part of the survival of the fittest mechanism at the same time. And if, someone is stupid and they want to, here's the reality of it fundamentally. Is if someone wants to make stupid decisions now, they can. It's just illegal. Stupid decisions as in taking a drug, driving, killing themselves, like that sort of thing, right? They can do that now, and it happens.
Yeah.
I think people are afraid that by legalizing or decriminalizing drugs in many ways, we will be creating more instances of those types of things. And that's just the one that most people think of, right? Like driving under the influence of something crazy, or going on a crazy spree and like killing people or something, drug crazed maniac goes into shopping center, blah, blah, blah. Like that's always on the news, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think fundamentally when it comes to drugs, we need to start realizing that people are addicted to drugs because of mental health. And mental health fundamentally is just typically a breakdown in, breakdown is probably a poor choice of words, a build-up of traumas. And so if we don't treat those traumas, then people have mental health issues. And so we need to start looking at it from that perspective.
I could not agree more.
Start treating
100%.
Start treating it like that, which means people get a freely given help. And there are powerful tools like these psychedelics, which are shown to help treat those sorts of things, childhood traumas and addictions, which is why they're so powerful. And, stop putting people in jail just because because they had a shit childhood, their parents beat them, they got raped as a teenager, sexually abused, whatever it is. And I don't say that just lightly. I'm not throwing that around. That's probably a common thing that happens. And then they turn to drugs, they get addicted, they don't have any other support. We let them down as a society, and then they end up dealing small quantities just to get by, to get their next fix, and then they're in jail. Oh, yeah. Look, it's like...
The war on drugs is over.
Yeah, it is.
You lost.
So,
it's... I totally agree with what you're saying about, like, are you familiar with Portugal's approach to drugs at all? Yeah, it's a health issue, not a crime issue.
Yeah.
And I think we should very much be treating it the same here.
And so, I think when it comes to psychedelics, there are two, sort of avenues that you can look at it, in my opinion, right now. And one is the clinical therapeutic use, which is backed by science and saying, hey, like, 75% of people in these clinical trials are showing to basically say that after one session, it is almost curing their depression, anxiety, and PTSD.
The same with MDMA as well.
Yeah.
MDMA has been shown.
And there's clinical trials happening in Perth and Melbourne at the moment. Yeah, through Edith Cowan, through an organisation called Prism. So there's that avenue, but then there's the other avenue of it, which is that these things help us unlock more of our own human potential and exploring more of the human experience through what we can experience internally with the psychedelics, like overcoming the fear of death because you see what the truth of life is. I can't explain that in words really, but...
No, it's probably the most common benefit people report, right?
Yeah.
Their loss of fear of death.
So there's that. So for me, the reason why I advocate for legalization is because clinical trials is, hey, the pharmaceuticals companies are making money off this. Full legalization is people can explore their own consciousness and have those mystical experiences which actually can help you really profoundly experience life in a whole new way.
Yeah, and I'm really glad we talked about this because it's I think it's something that I've spent a little bit of time on lately, like thinking about, because I'm very much an advocate like you are. I think people should basically be able to do whatever the fuck they want, providing it doesn't negatively impact other people.
Yeah,
I think we have to be very careful about in terms of the balance of individual freedom as well as we are part of a society and to balance those two off. And I have been thinking a lot lately more about things like psychedelics and more like marijuana and stuff like that, about how I'm just trying to figure out in my own head, like how the practicality, how would you actually get it to work in a society? Because I think the reality is I think that's where we're at, like politically. It's not so much a question of whether it's going to happen or not.
Yeah.
I think it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. It's just about this transition space now. I mean, you probably got, and this is, grossly discriminating, but you probably got more conservative older people that don't want to have a bar of it and think that everyone's going to turn into crazed, criminals, and younger people that, on average, typically a little bit more progressive, and these things will change. But how can you take care of the concerns that we might have in society and that people might have, but also give people access to these things? I mean, the difference that they can make to people dealing with PTSD and it's just been, and it's something that I've been very passionate about is mental health for a long time. So knowing the difference it can make in that space, it's something I'm very, very interested about. Yeah,
I think by and large, the conversation about this is really what we're saying is, can people be trusted? It's like there's this thing: can people be trusted? And
can they?
I think they can, because if you really think about it. Right now, okay. If humans and the society we live in weren't on average on the whole like good in inverted commas, and good and like mean well and don't want to do harm to others, we would all be killing each other.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I think everyone is always trying their best.
Yeah.
And what they're dealing with is all their shit.
Yeah.
Their patterns, their past, their, all that kind of stuff as well. And, that was actually the other thing. Oh my God, what's the word? I can't think of the word. Self-will. What are we talking?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, like
there's some new age thinking that we have no facility over our own decisions.
Yeah.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Control.
No. Oh my God! What was that word on the end of my tongue? You know what I mean, though, right?
Yeah. I know what you mean. I'm just looking it up to see if there's another word that can come up, because I know what word you're looking for, but I also can't think of it. Anyway, I think we know what we're saying. Like, Well, you and I have had this chat before, and I think you want to believe that we do because it's important. It's important to you to believe that.
I think you're probably 100% right. Yeah. And look, I'm aware of it as well.
Yeah.
Like,
and who knows? Like,
I have seen on many occasions people being able to, what's the best word to describe it? To not be their patterns, to not be what I refer to often as their machinery.
Yeah.
I've in fact, used to lead programs where this was the focus. The focus was about having people distinguish their automatic ways of operating and then being able to alter those essentially to be able to produce the result, be able to produce the results they want in life effortlessly without having to, most people do it by having to put in effort or changing habits or being self-disciplined. What if you could produce the results that you want without doing any of that? Like it was just a natural self-expression. So, but I am also aware that it could quite just be my ego, just hoping that we do have that self-determination. When maybe we don't.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think it's a really interesting conversation.
Well, I think there's 2 points to it. Is that in the reality of what we're experiencing, it would seem as though we do. And it's probably quite helpful to believe that.
Yeah.
I don't wake up every day and go, and sit for an hour, like waiting for something to happen. I get up and I make things happen, right? I go and make my food and I go and do this and that. It's a decision I'm consciously making. So it would appear on that level that we do. This is what I'm thinking. But I think the theories behind not having any self-will is sort of like on a higher level, which is that there are things at play beyond what we can perceive. And, yes, someone might go to a workshop and be able to face off with their conditioning and go, oh shit, I don't have to smoke anymore. I don't have to be toxic in relationships anymore. I can change. And they do, and they change. But the thinking is that what led them to that moment, and did they have control over any of that? Do you know what I mean? It's almost like the original. It's just like from the moment we're born, there's a series of butterfly effects that just keep happening and just ripple throughout our life and what's happening and all the events around us. And I suppose it's like, do we actually have any control over those? And for me, I think it's like living with a bit of a blend of both. That I definitely choose to surrender to life more often than not. And it would seem that there's been occasions where I'm like, fuck, on the surface, I actually really wanted that thing, but I'm just not being presented with anything other than this. Yeah. And I'm just going to surrender to that and go with what keeps showing up for me. I
think the thing I like about it is I find that human beings are way too hard on themselves.
Yeah.
And I think if we can be more aware of the automatic nature of how we operate, and then it's not us, we just did that thing because it was a stimulus response. Your brain fires the neural pathways before you even have a chance to make any kind of conscious decision. Yeah. And I think that would just give people some space, when they do, there's all sorts of times I might be in a bad mood or had a bad phone call or I don't know. And my wife come down, she says something and I just snap it up. Just instantly, But then being able to, rather than having to justify or defend it, be able to go, hang on, that's just Tim doing the brain thing. Yeah. It wasn't me. And in that case, I'm able to let it go really easily. Hey, baby, how I just snapped at you?
It wasn't actually me.
It wasn't me. It was no. But it does give me a lot of faculty in that area because I don't get so attached to my own behaviour.
Yeah.
I'm not.
There's a lot of power in that.
Idiot, why'd you do that? You moron. Yeah. I can just go, all right, hang on, that was just my brain doing my brain thing. I'm just now going to go and clean it up and, apologise and try and put something in place so it doesn't happen again, or try and train myself out of that pattern.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what it is. Yeah. Yeah. I don't have the answers to that. It's just an interesting topic. But that is also why I like psychedelics so much as well. And beyond, the use in clinical therapy, it's also like what's happening when you're tripping is the brain shuts down the default mode network, which is where those habitual responses are stored.
That's right. Yeah.
So it shuts that down, and it's like fresh snow falling on a snow ski slope. And you can more easily carve out new pathways, and so your brain is creating new neural pathways. So you can change your habitual responses over time.
When did you start with psychedelics?
In late 2017.
And I imagine you've had a large amount of experiences, or
yeah.
Can you tell me about your most profound experience?
I've had probably a couple, but probably the single most profound experience was what I actually just spoke about on my last podcast was the experience with 5-MeO DMT, which is the toad.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
It comes from the back of a Sonoran desert toad. It excretes and basically refines into a powder, and you put it in a pipe. And
is that the one Joe Rogan thought he was dead on?
Yeah.
He thought he was dead. He thought, I fucked up. I died.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
In actual fact, I want to preface this stuff isn't to be messed with. And I don't ever take any of it lightly, as in, there is not known to be there's no known overdosable level of psilocybin from mushrooms and DMT and stuff like that. There's not, they haven't gone off, you take this much, you'll die and overdose. It doesn't work like that. Your body can't consume that much. But what can happen is, our body still has stress responses, and some of the experiences are overwhelming for the body. Like my toad experience, I died, and that's what I thought. I died, and then experienced myself as one with everything. And I experienced myself.
Were you scared? Was it scary?
I was not present, so there was no fear.
Okay.
I was experiencing it, but I was the experience.
Okay.
Sounds hell trippy. I get it. It's probably the DMT is probably the one thing that is really hard to explain with words because it is out of this world.
And it's quite quick as well, isn't it?
Yeah, 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And so for me, I experienced myself as infinite, without limitations, without fear, without attachment. And so as, just as everything, and you come back, and as you're starting to come back, you're starting to logically process what you just experienced. And it's like, the only way I can kind of maybe put it into words is like, it's like stripping your brain clean of all your conditioning and experiencing what it's like to be that free, and realizing you don't have to hold on to anything anymore, and you can live from that place. And it was so profound. Like it was the most overwhelming experience of my life. My heart started pounding. Like my heart went from 57 up to 170 because I was wearing a heart rate monitor. It only lasted sort of 9 minutes in total. And the way it has impacted my life is that there are situations that I would normally experience conflict in, that since doing it, there is no present. There is no conflict.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a conflict where I would feel threatened, like a physical conflict, but a conflict if there was a certain situation that I didn't like in, in business or something like that, or in friendships or relationships, or
So in the past, you kind of get reactivated by those things in the past, but now that wasn't there, or
correct?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Whether it be, like let's say jealousy is a good one. I might have been jealous of a certain situation with my partner or something, and that just wasn't present anymore because I understand. Because I have experienced myself without all of that. And so you can more easily live from that place. That's not to say that I don't get triggered or reactivated.
No, of course not. No, look,
I'm absolutely still human, but it's done a lot for me personally in liberating myself to be more of a fuller expression of who I feel I truly am.
Less a biological creature that's stuck in survival and more a human being that can express themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. It's fucking interesting. Really interesting. But I'm interested to jump back into some questions for you that I had. Do you like?
Should we? Here's one thing that was present to me just before.
Yeah.
We kind of started talking about the economic cycles, and I didn't kind of finish it.
Yeah, that's what I was heading back to.
Because I'm mindful that I may have left people there wanting to know a little bit more. So,
well, can I ask you a question? Do you believe that? So there's been some. You mentioned the land economist. There's been like a lot of these types of people who are often actually portrayed by mainstream media as kind of being radical and a bit, but they're like literally predicting things correctly for years, right? And there's a guy, Jim Rankin, who I think that's his name, who's been predicting that in 2020 there was going to be this huge financial reset and currency reset. Yeah. Do you know much about that? And it's pretty clear to me that like we're in a system where we're in a debt leverage system, and the way the system works, most people don't realize, is that the debt never gets repaid from countries and whatever. It just keeps getting rolled over and never gets repaid. And so eventually when there's too much debt for the system has to collapse and kind of contract in a way.
Yeah, okay.
That's sort of
I
summarizing
mean, it kind of is. I mean, you get the ebbs and flow of a market, right? I mean, we can, if we want to bring it back to like the Perth property market as an example, when you've got lots of incoming population, when you've got high wages because the mining boom was happening at the time, you're going to get a point where property becomes overvalued.
Yeah.
Right? But then what will happen is that, things start to balance out, people start moving away, your supply and demand, your fluctuations in the market. I don't subscribe to thinking that there's going to be some kind of reset where our current system is going to end and there's going to be a new system.
Right.
I also think when people start to understand the larger cycles, they can understand why these things play out as well. So, what we can accurately distinguish when it comes to land cycles globally is since about the mid-1700s is there's been a cycle that averages 18.6 years. Now, let's not get stuck on the 0.6, right? Because it's just an average figure. Like sometimes it's 16 years and other years it's other cycles it's 20. It's generally a 16 to 20 year cycle. And, I'll also tie back in with that 7 to 10 year. Like there's a reason why we think it's 7 to 10 year. And when you look at the way that the cycle plays out, so, I think we could probably go back in time a bit. Let's look at like 2001 to 2006 here in Perth. Mining boom. At the time, let's not distinguish it though as a mining boom. We're certainly in a booming property market because we've had booming property markets before. There's just different factors that have driven them. The last one was primarily mining, right? So, that was actually in the second half of the cycle. Okay, so it ran from what we refer to as a mid-cycle slowdown, which is where we see basically a stock market reset, but not a land value reset. Okay, so essentially the way the first half of the cycle plays out is like this, and this is the first half of the cycle was essentially about 2012 to about where we are now. Okay, so we come out of what sometimes people term as a reset. The GFC, people talked about it, the worst financial crisis since the Depression. And, let's also be real, we didn't even have a recession.
Yeah.
Right? But that's how it was talked about, okay? And those recessionary periods will typically run for around about 4 years. It takes 4 years to kind of clean everything out, balance out the market again. People then want to start getting back in the market and start making money. Now, when you've come out of a downturn, resources are sparse or scarce. So what happens in the first half of the cycle? It's primarily driven by innovation, technology, disruption, those kinds of things, okay? So as with all kinds of innovation, there's going to be some of those innovations which will become viable and marketable and others which don't and fall by the wayside. So that's what led to that really strong stock market bull run from effectively 2011, even though, technically it's probably 2012 to about, let's call it 2018, 19. Now, we then start to move into a period. And the other thing that limits, it's primarily a stock market driven growth, not so much the land market. And the reason for that is because the GFC just happened, right? And what always drives these big booms ultimately is credit.
Yeah.
Easy credit. If money is cheap and easy to get, then the market starts to get carried away, and the market will eventually become overvalued and overleveraged.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have the GFC to reset everything. Okay. But then what happens is all the government starts stepping in, going, "Oh, you naughty banks! Like you were giving away money too easy. We're going to put all these laws in place to make sure it never happens again." Right. And then that first part of the cycle is constrained by tight credit. So you do get growth, but you don't see as much housing market growth because you don't see the easy credit.
Yeah.
Okay. Then what happens is we hit what they refer to as a mid-cycle slowdown. And this is where this is where the innovation has to, like, some of it paid off and others didn't, right? So you got to have another clearing, right? You've got to have a downturn to kind of reset things again. Now, coming into 2020, we knew based on these cycles, and also don't think that I'm out there with some, spreadsheet software, mapping these out. Like, I've got people that I listen to and that are my mentors that have kind of much greater understandings of this. But they were predicting very early of 2020 that we were going to see a downturn, a major stock market downturn. In fact, I started personally kind of actually stepping away from that because I thought we weren't going to have it, because we were coming into an election year in the US. Typically what you see is markets flooded with money prior to an election. The president wants to ease credit, flood the money.
Sure.
Right? So election years are typically good years, economically speaking. So we thought that there might be a little bit of a blip on the radar coming into 2020, maybe not such a large financial meltdown until, of course, COVID hit. And, COVID and the coronavirus was that global event. There's that global uncertainty. It was just exactly what we needed to see that stock market crash. But because credit had been so tight in the first half of the cycle, you don't see a land cycle crash because people aren't overextended.
Yeah.
Like, some stats that I'll quote off the top of my head, forgive me if they're wrong, but I know they're going to be pretty close. Coming in towards the end of 2020, the average homeowner had a 54% LVR. Okay, so that means LVR, loan to valuation ratio.
Wow.
They own basically half their home.
Yeah.
So
that's in Australia.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So, all these housing bears that talk about, like income to debt ratios and, we're going to see 10, 20, even all the banks quoted 10, 20% falls in property, right? But it didn't happen. And once again, I think that's got a lot to do with the modern economics that they're taught and not so much the old school economics. So we saw the markets crash 38%, stock market, but we didn't really see any crash. And then what we see, as we always see in mid-cycle slowdowns, is we see loosening of credit.
Yeah.
Government stimulus. Banks were like, "Oh, you can't pay your mortgage? No dramas. Want a 6-month holiday?"
I know.
So it's really then all that stimulus. And by the way, you may have been reading about it in the news right now. All the talk is about unwinding all their responsible lending laws that they put in place after the GFC.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen because, the politicians want the economy to do well, so they'll wind it back. We've got cheap interest rates we've ever had. We're now going to have a significant growth phase, particularly. So Sydney and Melbourne won't typically get most of their growth in the first half of the cycle.
Right.
In the second half of their cycle, that's when the supplementaries, capital cities, get the majority of the growth. So your Brisbanes and your Perths, we're going to see huge amounts of growth. I always want to be careful about what I predict. So, this is a non-guarantee thing. This is what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to have the biggest property boom in Perth we've ever had.
Wow.
And here's my evidence for that. Every single boom has been bigger than the last. You go back as long as you want to go. Every single property boom is bigger than the last.
But then is that to say that the crash will be bigger than the last as well?
Probably.
So the ups and the downs, it's becoming more and more volatile in how it's going up and how far it's going, and sharply. That curve is just becoming sharper.
Exactly. And because we don't have people that understand the true nature of these markets, you're not able to govern it and regulate it properly so you don't have that. And I mean, there is also, I mean, the argument from the land economists that have kind of discovered and articulated this, they believe that the cycles will never stop. There's only one way that the cycles can stop, and that is by implementing what they refer to as a land tax. And essentially what that land tax would be is it's essentially this. You buy a block of land, the amount that it goes up every year is the tax.
Right.
Right? Now, that's because what they're saying is it's not your productivity anyway.
Yeah.
But there is some fairly sound arguments for this in terms of if we had that kind of tax where all we took was what the productive gains of society produced, we would not need to tax anything else ever.
Right.
You know, it's and what they would encourage you to do is actually to give it back to the citizens in the form of like a citizen's dividend. So you may be aware there are some countries around the world that have citizens' dividends where...
Not aware of that.
So I think some of the Scandinavian countries where they have major oil reserves. So every citizen gets part of what that oil reserve earns every year.
Yeah.
Like we could run a similar system.
Yep.
Now, I don't even know if I want that system. I like knowing the cycles and using them to my advantage so that I can, satisfy my aims and, the aims of my loved ones as well. And I don't know that a system like that would ever come into play. But like I said, you could fight the system, or you could say, well, look, I'm going to join them and I'm going to understand it and I'm going to own some of this land because that's what's going to provide me and my family with my security for the rest of my life.
When you talk about things like average LVRs at 54%, would it be fair though to say that is there any data to suggest that the people with the higher LVRs are those with cheaper homes, probably lower incomes, who have borrowed more money, 95%, they've only put down a 5% deposit or whatever.
Yeah.
And that therefore in these cycles, it's really, if you're saying that the boom is going to be bigger than the last and potentially the crash bigger than the last as well, isn't that a theory to... Sorry, I've asked two questions. I don't know. Isn't that a theory then to suggest that is just going to help the same cycle of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer and create that bigger divide?
Yeah, totally. So I also like to be accurate when it talks. So the rich are getting richer, but the poor are getting richer too.
Right.
Okay, so if we actually look at wealth inequality in Australia, so now, by the way, I'm not using it as an argument for anything.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying we shouldn't, take care of people or anything along
Sure.
those lines, but I do think it's important that, if we want to produce results in reality, we've got to stay related to reality. And the reality is that, I mean, the world is much better than it was 100 years ago. It's much better than it was 50 years ago, despite our own experience.
Yeah.
The poor continue to get richer.
Sure.
The problem is they're not getting they're not getting rich at the same rate the rich are.
Yeah.
Okay. But is there a problem with that? Not necessarily. I mean, there's personal responsibility, but we also have to allow for that. Some people have got resources that others don't, whether that's the education, they've got a mum and dad that can teach them how to invest in that, or, so it is, I mean, I guess it's probably the most complicated question in the world is, how do we provide an equal opportunity for everyone?
Yeah.
And maybe the answer is we can't.
Fuck.
I mean, okay. I don't know. Like we could get into conversation. I mean, I'm an advocate of capitalism.
Yeah.
Totally. However, I do believe that we also then need to provide a safety net because there's people that can't fully participate.
Yeah.
There's people that, just once again don't have the resources, whether it's their own intelligence, ability, illnesses, physical limitations. Like it's very hard to balance. Like you're never going to make it equal for everyone.
Yeah, of course.
But how can we?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think, even though that might be the conclusion, it's still important that we keep asking that question because if we keep asking the question, it'll keep us searching for better solutions, right? That help more people. It's interesting. It's a whole minefield of
totally
really how humans operate. Just give me 1 second.
Sure, mate. Did I give you enough about the economic cycles?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Probably the only other thing, because I didn't talk too much about the second part of the cycle, so just a couple of things I do want people to be mindful of. Though,
Yeah.
is that in this second part of the cycle, so this we anticipate between now and about 2026, maybe 2027, that bull run will happen. The last 2 years of though is what they refer to as the winner's curse. And it's where the market becomes overheated and over-leveraged. And I'm sure you've probably had similar experiences to me. I mean, I can remember, days where, you'd have a home open, it'd be the first home open, you'd have 80 people at a home open and 10 offers on the all over asking price on the first day.
I've never worked in a market like that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I can remember 2005, 2006, that's what it was like.
Yeah, I was 15.
One home open, yeah, sorry. I forget how old I am sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that. I mean, that's a really good indicator of an overheated market.
Yeah.
And that's where, I mean, we all generally know someone who's lost money with property, and it typically is either they haven't had a sound strategy or it's they've bought in that winner's curse period of time.
Totally.
And it's not a problem to buy there, providing your strategy will allow for the fact that you probably bought overvalued.
Yes.
And that we're heading into a recessionary period.
Yeah, and you can afford the repayments on the home, including if interest rates go up and so on and so forth.
And I mean, I advocate people hold whatever they can forever.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to, okay, I'm going to get in now and then it's at the peak, I'm getting out. But there may be those times when you get to the winner's curse, and this is certainly what we're going to do with our clients, is, assess, all right, let's have a look at your whole portfolio. Where you're at, where's your cash flow at? Like, okay, if things got tighter, if you lost your job for a year, would this be difficult? Okay, well, in that case, we need to give you a bigger buffer or something along those lines. So it might be the case that you consolidate a portfolio then or sell possibly an asset then, just to make sure you get through the next time. And also to, if possible, have you be cashed up, because in the recessionary period, you're going to be able to buy stuff for half what it's really worth.
Yeah, of course.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's sound advice. I don't know if you know much at all about cryptocurrency, but what role you're smiling at me? So, what role do you think like Bitcoin's playing in, or crypto's playing in this? Because obviously, right now it's 25K Australian for one Bitcoin. Was like 15K. I just googled it before, and there's like some people predicting it's going to go to 400K in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah.
Well, I probably. I think the first thing to say is this: I don't know. Yeah. I have no idea. I mean, I don't have an in-depth understanding of Bitcoin. However, here are my concerns. What's really valuable is the blockchain technology, and Bitcoin. All Bitcoin is a piece of software that uses that technology.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a currency. I think that's the other thing that's really important to distinguish. Bitcoin is a currency, and if you're using it like a currency, then there's absolutely no problems with it whatsoever. If you plan to use Bitcoin as an investment, though, I would not be doing that. And even if it was something where you wanted to put some money in and hold it for the long term or something like that, absolutely no problem whatsoever. My advice would just be do not invest anything that you're not willing to lose.
Yeah.
I could be entirely wrong. I'm sure there's probably some people listening right now that are shaking their heads and going, this guy doesn't have a fucking clue what he's talking about. But I think, once again, I think it kind of comes back to that philosophy we talked about before, where you can try and change the world or you can kind of just join them. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I have that philosophy with everything. Like, there are things that I will go out and will fight for at huge personal cost, as you know, because I believe in those things. But money and investing isn't one of them. For me, investing is it's a formula. And the higher the return, the higher the risk. So I'm not out to get the high. And I'm not even interested in. Even if I was sitting with 20 investors and they were all producing better returns than me, I wouldn't give a shit, because I'm very clear about. I have specific aims. I know when I have to achieve them by. I know specifically what I have to accumulate by that time. And then that will then produce me X amount per year to live. And I've done all the working so that I know I can have that car and this holiday and this, everything. It's all worked out. And, my strategy is then built to suit that. It's to get the returns that I need to without taking on any risk that I don't need to.
Sure.
And the big worry that I have with something like Bitcoin, I mean, I think probably Bitcoin will stay the distance, obviously, because it's, all the others I think will pretty much fall by the wayside. But I think then what will eventually happen is that governments, as they are already starting to do, will step in and they'll just say, this is our digital currency. So digital currencies will be a thing. But, if you want to operate in the normal marketplace, you'll be doing it with a centralized currency as we do now.
Yeah.
And not Bitcoin. It will still be useful and it'll still have a utility. But I wouldn't, personally, I'm not going near it with a 10-foot barge pole when it comes to as an investment.
It would seem to me that it's largely driven by organizations and people wanting to put their cash somewhere else that they feel is relatively safe / out of the hands of or being able to be touched by the government. So there's been a lot of talk about it being the growth right now being driven by a lot of fear of global currency resets, these global economic resets.
I think COVID-19,
government,
US elections. It looks
dollars being unstable, that sort of thing.
I don't think it's going to happen. But for a while there, it looked like the US was going to fall into some kind of civil war.
Yeah.
And you will definitely see people move to like something like Bitcoin in those times. And I think what's also fairly common is in the early stages of this second part of the cycle, it's also fairly common for the US to start a war. So, I anticipate probably that things will continue to escalate with China.
Yeah.
And that we might start to see some form of conflict there. Now, I don't know that it'll be a traditional war. It may be digital, conflict. It may be propaganda, war of words, things like that. But once again, that's going to play into the uncertainty thing as well. And it could, maybe that'll drive things, or maybe it will sustain Bitcoin for a little bit as well. I don't think it can sustain where it is right now. I think it's going to come off.
I think so too. Yeah. I think naturally it'll come down again. Interesting. Well, we're running out a bit of time. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your journey with the documentary.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked a bit about the problems of humanity and these sorts of things. Was it 2017 that you?
Oh my God. So let's think. So I think I actually did the filming in 2016 and I think it was released in 2017.
Yeah. So you were asked to be a part of a documentary where you were homeless for 10 days.
That's
correct.
Is that right? Yep.
Yeah. It was on SBS. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So I had them reach out to me and just kind of find out if it's something that I might be interested in. And it's immediately something I'm interested in. I really like pushing myself physically. And mentally to see how far I can go. Like, I don't know, learn how to deal with myself when I'm at the extremes, So things like, climbing mountains I've done, boxing, despite, that's for anyone that knows me, I've never done anything like that my entire life. But then also the documentary. So yeah, they approached me and for me, really my life at the moment, the way that I kind of, I guess I'm looking, like I said to you before, like I've got a limited amount of time here and I want to try and make the biggest impact that I can. And I can't do it naively. Like I have to balance that with the needs of my life as well, right? But I want to approach these things honestly as well. So, I think that's what appealed to them is, when they asked me, what are my thoughts that I have when I see a homeless person? I was like, okay, well, let's just, let's look down and dirty. What do I sometimes think to myself? And, I'm judgmental and, come on, mate, get off the drugs or, and so I shared that stuff with them. They're the kind of thoughts that I've had in the past, I've also done other stuff like bought food for homeless people and, there's a mixture, right? And then they didn't tell us a lot about it. It was just, look, this is a 10-day immersive experience. They said that's all. They wouldn't tell us any further than that. But I guess that probably it would be, basically sleeping rough or being homeless for 10 days. And then rocking up, basically they kind of took everything off us and there was 5 participants in total. They dropped us in different points in Melbourne City. None of us were from Melbourne, so, they didn't want you to be familiar with the city. and I got dropped off in Fitzroy, and then basically had the 10 days of camera crew following me 24/7. Went through different stages as well. So I spent the first, I think it was 4 days, maybe 5 days sleeping rough, so out on the streets, and then I went into what do they call it? It was like supported housing. So you might go into a centre that's maybe Vinnie's run it or something like that. There's 54 beds.
Yeah.
And they, you're living with 54 other homeless men, but they've got a lot of support services around you. It was kind of scary going from living on the streets, funnily enough, because I could keep to myself. But then when you're in a confined area with 54 other people are dealing with things like mental illness and, substance abuse and stuff like that, it was a little bit frightening. And then finally moved into what they call transitional accommodation, which is you're now in a boarding house somewhere with no support whatsoever. And it's funny, the emergency accommodation was brilliant. Brilliant. I was pretty scared when I first walked in there, but I had to kind of just break, because, I've got a camera crew with me. A lot of people didn't want to have a bar of me. They didn't know whether I was just some journo showboating or, and then over time they, so what are you doing? And I would tell them about it. And when they realised I was just a guy who was willing to do this to kind of shine a light on it, they actually kind of really accepted me and, they didn't want me to go. And I don't know, I really missed that time, actually, spending that time with those guys. Made some really good friendships that I still, or one friendship that I still maintain today.
Yeah, wow.
But, extreme circumstances as well.
Yeah.
It was tough. The transitional accommodation, the lobby, there's just doors, like, lined up.
I remember you saying
like in
this,
Bunnings,
yeah.
Because they know door's going to get kicked in and, and we're just going to have to put a new door on tomorrow or something along those lines. So that was pretty frightening. And it was, the whole thing was tough, like really, really tough. Physically, I could have been walking probably 15, 20 Ks a day because, you're carrying everything everywhere. It was in the middle of winter, record rainfall, you're sleeping on concrete or cardboard, like your hips get really stiff and sore. Then there's the mental stuff, like you wake up, you don't know what time it is. Am I meant to get up? Do I need to be somewhere to eat now? Do I need to go to the toilet?
Yeah, right.
It's crazy the little things that impact you like that. Like you wake up, okay, maybe the garbage truck went by. It's light, but what time is it?
So as in, it's important to know the time, because when you're homeless and you don't have any money or whatever, you need to, there's free food at certain soup kitchens or whatever.
At 9 o'clock that served breakfast.
But you don't have the time.
For half an hour. Fuck. I needed to be there.
Yeah, wow.
And that was all difficult, but essentially I was a tourist, right? 10 days. Okay, so you can deal with that. But the thing that will forever impact me was, I guess, how difficult it was emotionally. Meeting and speaking with people, and I probably get a bit emotional talking about it as well. I learnt a lot about people, and I realised a lot of my preconceived notions were exactly that. Like, the majority of people who are dealing with substance issues on the street, normally they develop those substance issues while being on the street. That's not why they're on the street. And then I also got a really interesting perspective as well. So last couple of days, we had no money the whole time unless you did something to get money. Last few days, they gave us $15 a day. And the basis for that was that's what the average homeless, after paying for rent, that's what the average homeless person has to live on every day.
Right.
What are you going to do with your $15? I tell you what I did the first day. It was a Friday night. I went to the pub. I ordered a taco and a pint, and I watched the footy on the TV. And it was for me because I needed to feel normal, like I needed to escape, and then it kind of got me thinking, like, if I have a tough week, I might catch up with mates for dinner on the weekend and smash a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Like, why am I being judgmental of this person who, they're on the streets homeless, have been for 5 years, and because they want to go and buy a bottle of wine?
Yeah.
Do I really give a shit?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And then even to extend it a little bit, and you do have to be a little careful with this stuff, but, the guy that I'm friends with now, so he didn't want to talk to me initially when I was in the emergency accommodation. He didn't know who I was and obviously they're dealing with probably what is the worst moment of their life. The last thing they really want to be is on TV,
Yeah.
And then after a couple of days, he's like, I've been talking to some of the other guys, Tim, you're a good guy. I will talk to you. How about, we go and play a game of pool and I'll tell you my story. So we went into the rec room and we played a game of pool, and, I'll kind of give you the short version, but essentially, this guy grew up in tough circumstances, very young age, something like 8, his brother commits suicide. Age of 12, his dad commits suicide. How a kid would deal with that, let alone a family unit that really probably doesn't have the support and resources they need. And he, he's been in jail. He's been a heroin junkie for a while. And 18 months prior to me meeting him, he was telling me that he was over it, and he got hold of a pistol, put it in his mouth, pulled the trigger, and for whatever reason, the hammer went, but the bullet didn't go off. And after that, he was like, I need to fucking change something. And I just can't imagine. Can you? I've got a daughter, 10 months old. Like, I've got nephews that are 6. Like, I can't imagine. Like, breaks my heart to think of, one of them having to deal with that stuff. Another lady that I met, a transgender woman by the name of Bellatrix, her mum started giving her drugs at the age of 2. Like, it doesn't give you much fucking chance.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was left in awe of these people. I was left like, do you know what, Bellatrix? If I was you, I don't know that I would have made it this far and be in such a good fucking state.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it really was, and it really, I guess, because the last 10 years for me has been primarily focused on infinite wealth. A lot of the time when I was not working, I was doing a lot of my study. I'm super passionate about human beings and the development of human potential and why we work and how we work the way that we do and how we restrict ourselves and get in our own ways. And, it really kind of reignited that passion in me, because it became really clear that, we're never going to solve homelessness with more houses. Never. Like, the issue is not houselessness.
Yeah.
It's homelessness, and it's not about a roof and 4 walls. And I don't give a shit about roof and 4 walls. They will go where they feel safe. They will go where they feel accepted. They will go where they don't feel judged for who they are.
Yeah.
And isn't that a home for everyone?
Yeah.
So, I think really if we want to end scourges, things like homelessness and, even drug addiction, like you were talking about before, that lack of connection, we really need to look at how we treat each other.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've got any access to it, or I think we have insufficient access to it approaching it the way that we approach life now. Like, I think if we can, and, like I said, I could be completely wrong, right? But, I think that if we can have a much better understanding of how we are as a creature, there's so much superstition around human beings, whether it's religious superstition or, I wanted to ask about spirituality because I didn't know, I was just curious. And, but, I think there's also a lot of superstition, or there can be, and once again, maybe I'm completely wrong, right? But if we can remove the superstitions and I start to do, like, we're a biological creature who fundamentally has gotten where we are through our survival instincts, and our survival instincts only want to do, one of about 5 things, which is, flee, fuck, feed, fight, or I don't know, something else, right? And we have no facility over those things. They are automatic and you cannot transcend them.
Yeah.
And they will have a real impact on, if you're not eating properly, that'll impact what you can produce in life. If you're not sleeping properly, that's going to impact what you produce in life. But that's only the first part. Second is that we're a linguistic creature. And that sets us apart from every other creature on the planet. And has made us, the top of the food chain. So it is a brilliant skill that we've got, but there are downsides to it. I think people don't realise how much of the world they live in is purely linguistic in nature. Do you know what I mean by that?
No, explain it.
So human beings ultimately live in 2 separate worlds. We live in a world of phenomena, so things we can touch, taste, feel, see, and then we live in a world of concepts, or technically the word is abstractions. So our brain has this ability that no other creature has, and it's in our prefrontal cortex, and that's the ability to create abstractions.
Yeah.
Okay? Or concepts.
Yeah.
We're the only creature that we're aware of that lives with a concept of today and tomorrow and yesterday. No other creature lives like that.
That we know.
Yeah, that we know.
Yeah.
Right? And I also want to be clear, like, separate language and communication. I'm not saying that other creatures don't communicate, because they do.
Yeah.
But language is something different. And, I mean, there's even been studies that were done in Europe that measured, I think, German-speaking and English-speaking people. And German-speaking people can see shades of blue that we can't see.
Right. Because they have words for
Our
it?
language. Well, I don't have a fully detailed explanation for it, right? And maybe I don't even know that they do either.
Yeah,
Right?
okay.
But it kind of does come back to what we were talking about before, about the majority of the world that we live in, or what we perceive as reality, is actually just reconstruction in our brain. And everything in our brain is stored in a very particular way. So one of the things I love sharing with people is about, so it's a book called The Positive Bias. It details an experiment that was done with human beings regarding significant life events. And in most people's memory of significant life events, like as an example, something like 9/11.
Yeah.
They typically have, and maybe it's a bit long ago now, but they typically have very clear memories about where they are, what they were doing when they heard these things.
Yeah.
And this experiment was done, it was being done on something else, and 9/11 happened. So they changed it to 9/11, and they interviewed, I think it was a couple of hundred people, about where they were, what they were doing with relation to 9/11. They then interviewed all those people 2 years later. 25% of people who were interviewed didn't even get one thing right.
Yeah.
However, their memory was crystal clear.
Yeah.
So it points to that, even our memory, what we store in our memory, it's not reality.
No, it's
It is
distorted.
our interpretation
Yeah.
of what we experience. And that, I think, gives us a huge ability and a huge power to shape the world that we live in through the only thing that we have dominion over,
Yeah.
which is what we say, our word. You can't control, our age, our weight, these are things that we have no say over. But the thing that we do have say over is what we commit to, what we declare, what we promise. So, I just think it would give people a greater, all I want for people is for them to have a greater access to what it is that they want.
Yeah. Likewise. Likewise.
And not to say that any of what I said is correct, because I don't fucking know. It seems to work for me. It seems to work for a lot of other people. And I think it's one of those lifelong discoveries that, who knows, in 10 years' time, we might turn around and go, fuck, I was really wrong about that, wasn't I?
Perhaps. I have a feeling that we're going to have to set up a part 2 to this conversation, because I feel like we could go for another couple of hours.
Sorry, mate.
No, don't apologise. Like, I'm excited. I want to have another conversation about
great.
this.
Anytime, mate.
Yeah,
I love this stuff.
Really, really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for listening. And tune in to the next episode next week.